It was just like old times, when I would go out to fight another battle to keep my family safe. Only this time, I had a horde of friends at my back. Even Samuel had allowed Sarah to draw patterns across his breastplate and arms, although he looked a little uncomfortable about it. I didn't see Deidre anywhere now, but as we all made our way down to the lawn, I spotted her right away. Dressed in leathers herself and painted in Celtic spells, she was putting the dye on each of the warriors standing on the lawn with a focused look on her face. Sarah hurried to join her in the work, and if I hadn't been so furious and anxious to get going, I would have laughed. All the men and women out there were seasoned warriors, but they all allowed the two women to paint them blue and yellow, several giving me frowns as if to say they didn't really appreciate the sentiment. But since I had donned the paints, they each felt unable to decline. Lysander's face in particular was priceless, as Sarah started her work of finger paint on his bare chest and back. While Jaden, now in panther form, was purring in contentment while Deidre ran paint across his black fur, creating beautiful blue and ochre swirls. Saratin materialized from the dark beside me all of a sudden and nodded. "She's there. Place is swarming with wolves, but they're mostly pups. There's an evil inside the house though, and Thornton's men are patrolling the premises." The black man swept his eyes across the lawn to look at all the warriors gathered and nodded. "We will manage. I see that there's more arriving every minute. Good. Let's move out," I ordered. Gistas, H's, Oftry, Fime, Antelial, and Thinkter Injectors. Well, Levery descended is it too? We have duddered to something down the hen and find Evertamia. We have duddered the stairs to the hole they'd locked me up in. I knew it couldn't have actually been hours, because my stomach hadn't warned me for dinner yet, but it felt like eternity. It was cold and damp, and even though it seemed like I'd found the connection between my mind and that of Tlanextic, he had not responded. Nor had I noticed anything from Alexander. Were they really unable to find me? What was going on? The sliding of bars against the door indicated that someone was opening the door, and I backed away from it and turned my back to the wall, making sure I could face whoever was coming in and that they couldn't surprise me. The door swung open with a squeaking noise, because the hinges were a little rusted, and then Stephanie strutted into the room wearing high heels and a swishing silky dress that made her look drop-dead gorgeous. And drop-dead you would if you let her sink her claws into you. "Here she is, Ryum," she said huskily, clearly putting up her best seductive act towards the man that followed her into the room. He was of average height, but that was all that was average about him, I noted as I took in his appearance. No older than 30 at the most. I knew that looks could be deceiving, and instead relied on the feeling of age that rolled off him. He was old, at least twice as old as Alexander, of that I was sure. His skin was pale and unblemished and flowed over a powerful physique, built for war and combat, as indicated by the dark clothes he wore, only relieved by the flash of steel, a long, thin blade at his side, and heavy buckles on his boots. Hair as white as snow fell sleekly across his forehead and over his ears, but it was his eyes that got me the moment they turned to me and focused on my face. A red so intense that it seemed his eyes were consumed in flames, stared at me with such disdain and disgust that I stumbled back until I could feel the wall at my back. Thin lips quirked up just a little at my obvious shock and fear. "Yes, leave us, Siren," he spoke, and my skin prickled as goosebumps broke out all over my body. I knew that voice. Stephanie hid her disappointment well, and started out of the basement, daring to run a manicured hand over the demon's chest in passing. He didn't hide the fact that he stared appreciatively at her backside as she made her way up the stairs. Turning to me, he smirked and stepped closer till I felt him crowd in on my personal space, my heart thumping erratically in my throat. She'll be dead before all this is over. But it would be a shame not to have a little taste before that happens, don't you think? He said to me as he lifted one pale hand to my face. I turned my head sideways to avoid him, but he reacted with a growl. Then suddenly his hand was around my throat and he lifted me off my feet. Gasping for breath, I clutched at the fingers digging into my skin and crushing my windpipe. "You've been out of my grasp for far too long, little one," he growled, squeezing his fingers a little before suddenly releasing me and stepping back. Wheezing and gasping, I fell to the floor, my throat a burning agony as I labored to get enough oxygen into my lungs. I glared up at him. "What do you want of me?" "Of you? Nothing. You're absolutely useless, but you'll serve to get me the boy. I'm sure your mate will hand him over in a heartbeat to save you," he said gleefully. Never, I exclaimed, knowing in my heart and soul that Alexander would never even consider it. He considered Andy as much part of his family now as I was. Alexander wouldn't even sacrifice Deidre now because she was Bob's mate. Oh, but he already did, little angel, the demon in front of me spoke. He already agreed to our terms. Hurts, doesn't it? To see how even your mate can be corrupted. I was shaking my head in disbelief even though it hurt my bruised throat. No, you are wrong. It's not true. It's a pity you've been promised to the pup, or I'd have had some more fun with you, my daughter, he spoke. Bending down, he ran the nails of his hand across the bare skin of my throat, across the mark, and I shivered in disgust. I knew better now than to pull away. Now I'm not supposed to damage you beyond repair. He rolled his eyes as if he thought that was utterly ridiculous. At least you've done me proud by resisting coming here on your own accord. Another semi-effectio Alex stroke of his hands across my skin. I tensed completely and pulled my legs close to my chest, shame and guilt washing over me for my own stupidity. I had resisted, but not hard enough. They'd still managed to get me into the car, without making a single sound of alarm. He laughed, a mirthless kind of sound, and those flaming red eyes flared up brighter. I had a distinct feeling of heat on my face as he leaned in, like a raging inferno heating up the room and my skin. The demon shifted so he was kneeling beside me and leaned his face in closer, my heart nearly bursting out of my chest in fear, my body completely immobilized by some unseen force, the heat intensifying as if I'd stepped even closer to the inferno. I felt a nail in the hollow of my throat again. Loyalty, that's what it says here, doesn't it, daughter mine? Caressing a dark curl of ogham writing on my skin, part of my mark. He scoffed loudly. Such a silly sentiment. A prickle, and then a stinging pain. His nail broke the skin, and it sent a hot wave of pain rolling across my entire body. If I hadn't been restrained by unseen bonds, I'd have been trashing wildly on the concrete floor. As it was, all I could do was bite my tongue till it bled to keep in the screams of pain. As soon as it came, however, it left, and the demon stood back and looked down on me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a boy to drain and kill and a Regis to murder. I'll see you again once you finish the pup, or not if you do succumb to him. He sounded like he didn't care either way what happened to me. A second later, he was out the door. I still couldn't move, and I'd clenched my eyes shut to keep in the tears. I clearly heard the bars slide in front of the door to lock me in, but I couldn't move from my rolled-up position on the ground yet. The invisible bonds had gone, but my muscles were all cramped up from the assault of pain. How was I going to get out of here? Was Alexander going to hand him Andy? And was Thornton involved in all of this as well? How many creatures were even in the house right now? Besides that other demon and the wolves I'd seen when they brought me in? Oh, if only I could reach them somehow, or even till an X-stick. When the first bang resounded through the house, I scrambled to my feet and hurried to the door. There was a small crack to one side, and I tried to peer through it to see what was going on. The guard was cursing, but he still remained in front of the door. What was that noise? It almost sounded like something very heavy slamming into a wall. As I focused on the noises coming from above me, I realized it sounded like fighting. Real fighting going on up there. Was that Alexander and his people up there fighting the wolves? My heartbeat sped up at the thought that they were trying to get me out of here. Worry making my stomach clench painfully. What if someone got hurt? Or worse, got killed? It didn't matter that I knew that it wasn't my fault for ending up here. Well, not entirely at least. I should have fought harder. I felt horribly violated that Fort had managed to do so, that he'd gotten into my head somehow and made me get in that bloody car against my own will. Plaster rained down from the ceiling as another quake shook the building. Grinding noises were heard from upstairs. It made my guard on the other side of the door curse loudly and then hurry up the stairs to investigate. As far as I knew, there were no fault lines nearby, so a natural earthquake seemed very unlikely. What could have caused the quakes then? The thought of that gave me chills, and I sincerely hoped it was Lysander in his dragon form. More plaster fell from the ceiling, and cracks appeared along the walls, hairline fractures near the door. The single light bulb above me flickered, and then fell down with a crash, bathing the room in semi-darkness. If I didn't find a way to get out of here soon, the ceiling might collapse on top of me, burying me alive. To emphasize that, a really heavy bang rumbled through the building. The shocks were coming harder and faster now, and still shaking from the pain the demon, my birth father, had inflicted on me. I had to struggle to remain standing. My breathing still came in short, painful gasps, because every movement inflicted another short burst of pain at the center of my throat, right at the word loyalty that the demon had pierced with his sharp, claw-like nail. Just as I'd reached the door and started pushing and pulling in the hope the door had been weakened, I heard footsteps. It sounded like the muffled clicking of heels. That could only mean one person, and I climbed to my feet quickly, swaying in the process when it seemed like the entire building was shaking. If Stephanie was coming back to either get me and hurt me, or simply hurt me, I wouldn't go without a fight. Spotting a jagged piece of concrete on the floor, I picked it up and held it like a dagger, if need be. I'd either stab her or knock her out. Either way, I was going to try to get away from her if she was alone. The bars in front of the door slid away noisily. At the same time, a tearing noise echoed through the room. A crack appeared like a thin line right along the middle of the tiny basement chamber, and I hurriedly stepped over it towards the door. If that crack widened, I'd be better off near Stephanie instead of trapped on the other side. When the door swung open, it was slowly, and I could hear heavy breathing as if it was a struggle to get that heavy thing open. It was obvious that it didn't entirely fit into the frame any longer, as it grated along the floor. I couldn't see who it was in the limited light, but when the door was fully opened, a female form was silhouetted against the light. She was clearly alone. My fingers tensed around the rock in my hand. "Brittany, are you okay?" A tentative voice drifted into the room softly, barely heard over the loud noises of fighting and settling stone. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm going to help you escape," the voice added, and she sounded unsure and even a little scared. It took a moment for me to realize who it was, but when I did, my eyes widened in shock. Jennifer? I couldn't believe it. Was the stuck-up girl really going to help me, or was this some kind of ploy? It couldn't be, could it? I had no reason to trust her whatsoever, but I also knew that staying down here would probably get me killed. "Oh, thank God. You're alive." "I wasn't. Oh, I really thought the demon had gotten to you," Jennifer exclaimed as she stepped into the room, shining light in my direction with a black flashlight. The thing almost as thick as her wrist, and clearly made of metal, one of those heavy emergency ones. I could see that she had dust covering nearly every inch of her. Obviously, the plaster elsewhere in the house had followed the same fate as that of the plaster in the small basement room. She was wearing snug-fitting jeans and a long-sleeved shirt, but there were still heels on her feet. How could she walk in them when the building shook so much? Stumbling, I made my way towards her and the door, to freedom. "No, I'm okay. Just a little dizzy." I added the last as my head spun and my vision swam in and out of focus for a moment. A loud rumble shook through the building, and then I heard the noise of falling stone. "Watch out!" Jennifer was screaming, my body automatically jumping forward and my arms coming up to cover my head. Not fast enough. The thought crossed my mind the moment a sharp pain shot through my left leg, the appendage crumbling and sending me sprawling to the hard floor. I managed to catch myself on my hands, but I didn't even have to look to know that a rock from the ceiling had hit me. The pain, eerily similar to how my wrist had felt when it had been broken, told me that my leg had followed the same fate. I had to focus on my breathing to get my vision to clear and the ringing in my ears to subside. Jennifer was cursing a blue streak I didn't expect from her as she scrambled towards me, hands running over my back, and then a sharp jolt of pain through my leg again. I nearly blacked out from it, but then it eased, and I realized she'd lifted the debris off of me. "Can you walk?" A soft voice, soothing tones, and it told me my leg was a mess. She just didn't want to scare me with the reality of it. "I doubt it," I gritted out as I pushed myself up on my hands and twisted so my weight was on my other leg. "I'll have to help you then." The hands from before returned, one slipping around my waist, the other slinging my arm across her shoulders. Surprisingly, Jennifer pulled me up with little effort. She was clearly stronger than she looked. Gasping because breathing was still painful and because my left leg was a searing agony. "We can't stay here. Need to get out of this building before it falls down." "I don't know what's going on outside, Brittany, but there's a dragon there and a whole horde of demons and wolves. I really hoped that dragon was Lysander because that would mean Alexander was here too." Jennifer seemed to sense what I wanted to hear and ask. Or maybe she simply knew, because she added, "I didn't see Alexander, but I know he's out there, with loads of his own people." "Thank you," I told her as we made our way slowly to the door. I couldn't put any weight on my broken leg. Jennifer was practically carrying me. With Alexander nearby and Fort probably out there fighting too, I might have a chance to reach someone, anyone, telepathically. Closing my eyes for a moment to focus, I reached out towards my mate only to be bounced back by the same wall as before. My head was already spinning and pounding painfully in time with my leg and throat, so I hardly even noticed the pain from that backslash. Sarah and Andy were out of reach too. Only that golden line towards my grandfather was in reach, taunting me. Sending thoughts along it, I knew, even before trying, that he wouldn't respond. He'd lied when he said all I had to do was think of him and he'd come to help. Aya, please? We need help. We were nearly at the door when a voice cut through the air with a snap, reminding me of a whiplash. What are you doing? It was of course Stephanie, and her question was directed at Jennifer. The girl struggled to step closer to the door and maintain balance for the both of us, while everything around us was shaking and crumbling. Yet she stiffened at hearing her mother's voice. Now she'd tell her mother she was just getting me out because I wasn't worth anything dead, or something similar that would sound plausible to her mother. That, or it turned out she was here on orders after all. I'm helping her, Jennifer said, her voice clear and loud as she spoke in a short lull in the shocks and quakes that drowned out most of the sounds of fighting. Helping her? Why would you do that? You should be helping me. Stephanie sounded utterly surprised, in shock almost. Helping you, Jennifer scoffed as she stepped forward with me, closing in on her mother. You're working with not one but two filthy rapists, using an innocent as a bargaining chip and willing to kill a little boy. I'm not helping you with that. So that's how it is? Seemed like Jennifer had standards and morals after all, and her limit had been reached. Right in time to help me. Was this why she'd been dressing more demurely off late and had cut down the flirting with all the boys in school? Rage was filtering across Stephanie's face along with confusion. Clearly she didn't understand what was going on. Why Jennifer was doing this? My thought process was rudely interrupted when the building shook, so heavily this time that we were all tossed around like we were nothing. The sounds in the small room all overruled by the grating and grinding, as if the whole house was coming apart. When things steadied, I felt something hot slowly drip into my eye, but the pain that should accompany it was strangely absent. The room was still spinning, however, even though the actual shaking had stopped. Stephanie was no longer in the doorway, but Jennifer and I were close by, and the girl was already pulling me up on my good leg, trying to get me out that door and up the stairs. A look over my shoulder showed me a gaping hole in the floor, a black abyss below, just a few feet from where we were standing. The floor had simply cracked open along the line I'd already spotted earlier. Somehow, Stephanie was on the other side, balanced on a slab of concrete that was only connected to the wall by the steel wires laced through it. It really was a good thing. Reinforced concrete had been used. Otherwise, Stephanie definitely would have fallen down that gaping hole. The woman, a siren I knew now, didn't seem overly concerned as she crouched there. Instead, she seemed mostly angry as she yelled, "You are picking her over me. She's nothing but a demon's spawn. How can you pick that thing over your very own mother?" Jennifer didn't reply as she pulled me slowly up the first step of the stairs, the building shaking again, and more rocks and ceiling fell down, tumbling into the gaping hole. They echoed loudly as they bounced. My head was starting to feel so heavy that I knew I was losing a lot of blood. Whatever had gashed my face had hit me hard enough to make me dizzy. Even the pain in my leg was gone, and I barely noticed the burning of my throat any longer. It was in fact a struggle to remain awake and conscious. "I'm your mother," I heard Stephanie scream, but it was vague and barely came over the ringing in my ears. "You can't leave me here." I was sure the woman said more, but it didn't register as words any longer. Instead, I focused on helping Jennifer, putting my legs forward and leaning on the wall instead of her as we slowly ascended the stone steps. The last thing I heard clearly was Jennifer's voice, loud and almost crystalline. She spoke, "I can and I will leave you. I'm doing the right thing for once in my life instead of listening to your lies." Was there hope for Jennifer after all? Anything else that might have been said I missed? A roaring in my ears that heralded that moment just before passing out. My vision field becoming smaller and smaller until all I saw was gray, and then an all-consuming black. The soft PBations of the soft PBations. The soft PBations of fleece of cunning my skin felt oddly strange, and that combined with the tilting motion that reminded me of waves. I felt dizzy, and my eyelids wouldn't open no matter how hard I tried. Something wet and sticky clung to the side of my face, pulling on the skin. Garty ourselves. I will have wet it, thank you, and it was a comforting color with a related by background. White was good, white was safe. I liked white, especially this warm, cottony kind of white that enveloped me and comforted me. It seemed like I could hear a voice, but I felt too comfortable and safe to really respond to it. I'd rather stay in the nice white couldn't hurt me. When black started seeping in along the edges, I frowned. No, don't do that. But it was beyond my ability to stop it, and all too soon black enveloped me whole again. I was a quickly list axe, was a quickly sitting. I was a quickly list protectors, was a quickly setting. I was a quickly listing wrestles a quickly, and they're having butters of a quickly lists. I was a quickly list of was a quickly list. I was a quickly list, I was a quickly whisk. I couldn't even lift my palms to prevent it from happening again. My throat was burning. It felt parched as if I'd run a marathon in a desert, and breathing in air alone was painful. My head was spinning, and still I was unable to open my eyes. There were arms wrapped tightly around my torso, and I had the feeling of motion, heavy breathing in my ear as someone struggled to lift me. What was happening? I tried to help, kicking out my legs to push, anything to move and get away from danger. Danger? What danger? A searing pain shot through my left leg as I hit something with it, even when I moved. Pain blossomed in my body. Why was the world tilted? What was going on? Who was with me? Who was? And all true over the worlds in my name of our time. Come down here now. My mommy's voice carried across the large open space, and I waved at her enthusiastically. Look at how high up I am, Mom, I told her as I spread out my arms for better balance. I was perched on top of a wooden beam about 7 inches wide and on the second floor of a derelict building. Well, it wasn't that derelict, just abandoned and old. Very old, and a little in disrepair. But it had all these really cool hidey holes and exciting little nooks and crannies that no adult could crawl into. They were too big for them. But tiny as I was, I could still hide there from the boogeyman and the demons. But most importantly, you could climb all the way to the top and see the most amazing view ever, which was what I was currently doing now. But Mommy didn't like it, and she couldn't follow me with the baby. Brittany, she yelled, and I ignored the fear seeping through her voice. I was safe. She didn't have to worry. It wasn't like before, where I knew she was right to be scared. Nothing could happen to me even if I did fall. I waved again and grinned down at her. Look, I can stand on one leg. Leaning forward like a ballerina, I lifted my left leg up in the air, my arms still spread out. For a moment, I stood like that on the slim beam that stuck out like a crooked tooth from a gaping hole on the side of the building. Woohoo! I yelled as the wind shook the beam and made it sway from left to right. A second later, I was tumbling through the open space between me and the ground, the earth rushing up to meet me at breakneck speed. I spread my arms even wider and yelled, not in fear, but in excitement. I was flying. Mom was screaming, but she couldn't see me now. Shrubbery and trees concealing me from her. A short moment was all it took, and then I was back on the earth, no longer soaring. My feet gently touching the ground as a man plucked me right out of the air. No words were spoken as I took in his golden red skin and black hair. He looked like an Indian. Like Grandma's tribe, but different too. And I smiled hesitantly. Hey, I'm Brittany. Who are you? The man frowned and then smiled back. Chamali, little one. Now, don't ever do that again. Forget. A touch on my forehead with a slightly calloused finger, and then the world turned black again. There was lead railing was Darius. There was nothing, and then my skin tingled everywhere. It was exposed, dust hitting it like a fine rain. I heard someone cough, and I was glad I didn't have to do that. My throat hurt too much for that to be very pleasant. I heard something like wind, movement, the sliding of feathers against each other, almost like wings rustling, and I struggled to open my heavy eyes. One wouldn't work at all, something sticky gluing the lashes together. The other, I managed to open a crack. The light was sharp and painful for a moment, but then things jumped into focus. The jagged teeth of a broken building around me. Was that the second floor of the house? What had happened? Around it, the garden had turned into a war zone. No plant or tree left upright and gaping holes in the ground here and there. I could see wolves, but most of them appeared to be retreating now, and there were demons as well, in all kinds of shapes and appearances. They were all fighting with human-looking people, presumably witches and vampires under Alexander's command. What filled my vision mostly was a set of huge wings, radiant and so white that they were almost blinding. The man they belonged to, tall and beautiful and toweringly intimidating. Black hair unbraided this time, but decorated still with red ribbons and golden beads and rings. I tried to open my mouth to speak to him. My grandfather had come for me after all, but my throat was burning so much that I couldn't form words. Jennifer, holding me, stepped back, pushing me behind her as if she meant to protect me. It jarred my leg and reminded me painfully that it was broken. Finally, my vocal cords seemed to work, and I croaked out, "That's my grandfather, Jennifer." "Oh," she replied, and then allowed Tlanextic to take me from her arms. He was warm and safe, and instantly the pain washed away, blackness threatening to take me away again. I was sure that Tlanextic wouldn't worry about Jennifer and leave her stranded here if I didn't intervene. I grasped his black shirt tightly and struggled to speak again. "Don't leave her." A moment later, I felt Jennifer's warm breath filter over my face as she squeaked, obviously startled. Then darkness again. Japarice's clothes. Sibarice's clothes to provide. Shibrice's clothes to proficiently was part of the prominence and down. The feeling rejuvenating and restoring. It made me feel whole and complete, and finally it seemed like I could properly breathe again. I still couldn't open one eye, but it didn't hurt to open the other. It did feel like swimming through very murky water to reach the surface, but what I saw showed me the steel-gray eyes of my mate. Arriving at the house Brittany used to live in, I took careful notice of my surroundings, my senses fully extended so I wouldn't be caught unaware. Already I noticed the sense and mental signatures of 3 different wolves. I recognized them all from school, and knew I could dismiss them as a threat. Boys? Just little boys, that's what they were. Dragged into a conflict that wasn't theirs, because their alpha had lost it. I understood their loyalty nonetheless, and could even respect it in some way. That didn't mean they would escape punishment after this was all over, just that I'd be milder on them. Maybe I'd show some mercy, but that all depended on the outcome of today. They smelled uneasy, one even downright terrified, and I knew they'd all bolt as soon as the real fight started. If not, I knew my men would take care of them without any trouble. These kids were no match for my seasoned warriors. Harder to pick up were the scents and signatures of the more experienced fighters. But when I caught a whiff of the first, a man I'd known myself, I soon found more. The wide lawn gave plenty of cover for troops to hide, and Thornton was making good use of the area. Without a doubt, he really thought he had the upper hand. It made me uneasy. It could only mean he had some sort of ace up his sleeve. If he thought to install his own son as Regis here, it had to mean Edward was around somewhere too. A battle-hardened fighter with a mean streak even bigger than his father's, it was Edward who usually led in the punishments his father doled out to his people. More than 500 years ago, when I'd lived with my siblings in London under Raziel's rule, I'd once caught the bastard trying to force himself on Sarah. That had been the start of the animosity between me and Thornton. The vampire hadn't taken well to me roughing up his son. Never mind that Edward was at least 300 years older and a lot more vicious, and very much guilty of the crime I'd charged him with. He hadn't died from the punishment I'd meted out, nor had he learned from it. It was why rape in any form or kind was something I punished heavily. I would not ever tolerate it if I could help it. One simply did not take advantage of the weaker in a sick power play. Moving, so I could take a look at the other side of the house, I caught the distinct tangy smell of sulfur. Yes, the demon was here all right, and he'd brought his own little army. I was going to enjoy killing that bastard. I wasn't even shocked by the violent thought. That demon deserved 10 times over what was coming for him. That was one thing I was absolutely sure about. Jaden rubbed his huge head against my hand, and automatically my fingers curled tightly in his fur. "What is it?" I sent him the thought as I kept on scanning the grounds. I hoped to catch a glimpse of either Thornton or the demon. "Everyone is in position. Are you going to show yourself to negotiate?" the cat asked me, his long tail swishing in excitement. Jaden was itching to start the fight and bloody his claws. With my mind, I sought out Seriton to confer shortly. I knew it was useless to negotiate. They'd only settle for my death and Andy's, and if I died, Everyone I cared for might die too. I'd be giving the demon the most powerful weapon in history, Andy's destructive talent. And although I knew Samuel and Jaden, Anaya and Lysander and the others would all fight to keep Brittany and my siblings safe, they'd be on the losing side, I could not let that happen. Not to mention that my death would instantly mean Brittany's death too, now that we bonded in blood. My heart clenched painfully at that thought, and for a moment I wished I'd told her to wait just a few more days. I agree, my spy master said, but they might give you a hint as to where Brittany is. I nodded, and although Seritin was somewhere on the other side of the building, I knew he could sense my agreement. With a few quickly issued commands, I checked to see if Andy was secure. Another of my Taui Siich Dilsakta, a cousin of Lysander and a dragon also, and Danis were taking him to my stronghold together with a detachment of heavy warriors. Its location unknown to even most of my normal Tsichich. They were on their way out of the house now. Danis needed to open space to teleport such a large group all at once. But I trusted the warriors there, all incredibly skilled in their own way to protect them. Satisfied with that, at least, I nodded to the witch behind me and the rest of the fighters gathered around me. When I give the signal, attack. Remember, priority is to keep the human civilians safe. If they see you, wipe their memories, I said. Danis's grandmother reached out her hand to me. The crone was old and wrinkled, her figure stooped and her hand as gnarled as an ancient oak. Do not worry, we planned evacuation procedures. Everyone knows what to do. You can go into combat unconcerned about the welfare of the humans. Fogging and scatterspells have been cast over the area. No human will enter and anyone here won't remember a thing. I forced myself to politely nod, smiling gratefully even though it felt more like a grimace. The muscles in my face just wouldn't cooperate, and I didn't feel like trying really hard anyway. Without saying anything else, I stepped out of the protective spell that had hidden our presence and strode across the lawn to the big house. The wolves I'd smelled earlier came out of hiding and circled me, confused because they recognized me from school. They'd known I was a vampire, and they'd known I was mated to Brittany, but stupidly, they'd been unaware I was their regis too. Now they shrunk back, as I allowed the heavy weight of my power to roll over them. If I wanted to, I could crush them in a heartbeat. They sensed this, and knew to avoid me. None of Thornton's men came out of hiding, but the door to the house opened. 3 vampires, a shifter, and a witch came out. All except the last more brawn than brain. They flanked Thornton as he stood on the steps, looking down on me past his nose with contempt. I wasn't impressed. The symbol of him standing higher than me wasn't lost. However, I was so much taller than the British vampire that I could easily look him in the eye anyway. Which didn't mean that he was frail or small by any means. A vampire of his power and age hadn't survived this long being weak. Thornton's blonde hair was tied back as always with a black ribbon, giving him that old-fashioned look. I knew his beliefs still dated from that time too. I knew that I couldn't let him know how much he had me driven into a corner, so I smirked arrogantly. "Jonas, fancy seeing you here," I said mockingly, my voice carrying across the area easily. I could tell that the